This is the Auto Body Podcast, presented by Clarity Co.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the podcast. On today's episode, we have another guy from across the world. I don't even know how we pick up people from all over the globe, but happy to have him here. For all the way from Spain, we have Juan Pablo Franch Mazzino, and I have tried to practice that name like half a dozen times. I'm sure I still butchered it. Juan, how are you doing today?
Very well, Adam. Thanks for having me, and you did quite well on my name. That was really good.
I think you're just being nice.
No. Honestly.
So I want to say thank you for taking time out of your day to do this podcast today specifically because it's actually a national holiday where you're at. Would you mind just kind of quickly talking about the holiday and, you know, what significance it has?
Yeah, in Spain, first week of December, we usually take 2 days or even the whole week off. It's a religious holiday and also our Constitution Day. So 6th and 8th of December we take off, and it's nice to have some time off before year end, this final sprint until Christmas, and wrapping up things before the end is finally gone.
Well, very nice. And again, appreciate you taking time out of your holiday to do this.
No, pleasure.
So this is always so fascinating to me to hear how people in other countries and other places get into this whole industry. So can you just kind of walk us through what young Juan was like, where he was at? I believe you started off in South America. Is that right?
Yes. So I'm originally from Argentina. I grew up in Brazil, but then I came back to Argentina to study. And actually, I did my university in Buenos Aires, Argentina. And while studying, I started working in finance, more specifically in auditing. And when I walked away from what was then the two of the big six, Price Waterhouse, I was doing banks, and I wanted to really work in something much more like industrial. So I joined BASF back then as a controller, and my first assignment was being controller for the deco and refinish businesses. So that's when I moved first time into coatings. So it was kind of a financial role, but really getting to know the business quite well.
It's always really interesting to me. This is not planned at all, but the amount of people that we get on that started off with BASF or rolled into BASF. But to be honest with you, I'm not even sure if we've ever had, I think we've only had one person who actually works at BASF on. So always interesting to me that a lot of people start their careers off with BASF and then they, eventually branch off into other things. So,
well, it's a huge company, honestly, and the coatings division is just one business. So, depending on where you are at the world, it's a company where you would expect to find many people doing a nice career and jumping from one business to the other.
Yeah. So you said that you grew up in Argentina, you went to Brazil, and then you went back to Argentina for your secondary education?
Yes. I finished high school, and then I did university in Buenos Aires.
Just out of curiosity, what was the reason why you went from Brazil back to Argentina for the secondary education part of it? Just a lot better school system over there? Or
No, just related to my parents' work that they relocated back.
Got it.
So I really love Brazil. So growing up there was amazing, and it was just a natural step.
Now, as an ignorant American, what's like some of the biggest differences between Argentina and Brazil? Like, is Brazil more of like a kind of like a tropical type climate type area, or like what's kind of the differences?
Well, it's hard to say because both countries are really huge. Geographically, and you would say it's like when you talk US, it's hard to discuss to really define what's living in the US like, because as you say, Midwest is not Miami, it's not Florida, it's not New York. I would say it's quite similar, Buenos Aires and Argentina overall and Brazil, but Brazil overall, I would say it's huge. I was living in Sao Paulo, and Sao Paulo is over 20 million inhabitants.
Wow.
already back then it was over 20 million. Now I don't know exactly, but must be something like 25, 26. So it's a huge city, very diverse, like any of these major cities. So really lively, and Brazil as a whole, I think, as you know it from Carnival and the football and the atmosphere, is really a warm country, very nice place.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So you finished secondary education, and you started working for BASF as a controller, which, by the way, you and my wife would get along fabulously because she was an auditor and a controller.
Wow.
So she's heavy into the finance stuff. Me, I look at spreadsheets. I immediately I can't do it.
I tend to say it's a good basis for whatever you want to do afterwards, business-wise, set up your own entrepreneurial adventure and so on, because you really go deep into learning the basics, understanding figures. I think it's a good training, whatever you decide to do afterwards.
You know what? I'm glad you brought that up, because I will actually comment on that and say that, you know, there was a period of time in America where entrepreneurship was like the big thing, right? Like it was, and I would say that it's still kind of a big deal. And I've started multiple businesses, Clarity Coat being one of them. And, you know, you have people that ask you like, oh, you know, I'm thinking about going to college. You like, should I go to business school or, you know, whatever? And I actually have told them, like, honestly, no, don't go to marketing. Don't go to business. Don't do any of that, because while it's good, it's not as beneficial as going and learning finances. Sure. Because if you don't have your money figured out, you don't have a business. It's kind of like having bad personal spending habits and then trying to out earn those bad personal spending habits. It just doesn't work.
I fully agree. And even if then I specialized in marketing and sales, I have to say, while I was studying, the logic was exactly as you described, you know, learn the hardcore finance, auditing, taxes, and so on, because marketing and sales was supposed to be kind of easy, you know. This is many years ago. I know it's become a bit more sophisticated, but it was like that. I learned the basics, and then I developed myself into marketing and sales.
Yeah, I would say, and I'll ask your opinion on this, but I would say that marketing and sales those are skill sets that are a little bit more nuanced in the way that they're more of like a soft skill, where you have to, so like sales, right? You have to kind of pick up on what the other person is feeling. Like, are they kind of in? Are they kind of out? Like, you just kind of have to go by feel. And marketing, I would say, if I was going to give anybody marketing advice, I would actually tell you to start studying psychology more than anything else, because you have to understand how, when someone looks at something, how they're going to feel about it and why they want to buy into that particular thing and how to answer a pain point. Whereas financial stuff is more of like, that's just a hard skill. Like, it's just data. It's black and white. You need to, I would say that really good CFOs CFOs, sorry. They are a little bit more in touch with their gut, and they can pick up on trends and stuff like that. But you talk to most, like, I don't know, financial people, they're just analytical type people. It's just hard data that's in front of them, and that's it. Would you agree, disagree with any of that?
No, fully agree. And it's not easy sometimes for the finance people, the real specialists, to really jump to the other side and get into the shoes either of the customer or the sales guy. So it's something like a tough crossover, and you have to do it. But I fully agree with you that this marketing and sales side, it's kind of understanding who is who, and how do you reach the customer. So the customer journey, the distribution route to the customer. And especially in our coatings business, that makes a huge or all the difference if you understand who is who and their interests, their needs, and then you start talking marketing and sales.
Yeah.
And as you say, the basics are kind of, you know, there's a logic behind. You're trying to fulfill needs, say which are their interests, their concerns, dealing with objections, you know, and then you set up the whole, let's say, sales process around what suits that market the best.
Yeah, totally agree. Okay, so you're with BASF. How long are you with BASF for?
So actually, I worked with BASF for 21 years.
Dang.
Oh yeah, and jumping from this controlling function, it was only 1 year and a half. And my boss back then said, "Would you be interested in taking over our marketing for the refinish business?" And I said, "Yeah, sure, why not?" And I never looked back. That was when I put my first foot into marketing. And I really enjoyed the change. So never looked back, would not ever go back to finance and controlling, even if it was a super school, top quality school, as we discussed. But it was a long journey into getting deeper and deeper in marketing and sales. And I would add something which for me is top. I would really recommend every marketing guy to spend some times in the field, doing a real sales job, and even vice versa, to understand how it works. And I think it gives you a deep knowledge of the business.
Yeah, because you're hearing in real time and seeing in real time what a customer's pain points are, feeling that anger or disappointment or whatever it might be. And then when you go back to HQ, you're able to translate that so much better to whatever the media that you're trying to push. So you were doing marketing. What was your guys' main marketing outlet? Like, was it like print or was it digital at that point? Like, what year frame are we talking about?
Well, back then, so my first job in marketing, this is a long time ago, so I would say digital was not that much into the topic. We would have a marketing plan looking very conventional on doing trade fairs, printed material, customer events, product demonstration events, very traditional. Worked fine for the time. So I think this kind of typical marketing mix was very much effective. Of course, that changed slowly in time. I did get, I would say, 2-3 years down the road, there were the first implementations of e-commerce at BASF. And I was also invited on a project basis to implement e-commerce back then. And this was not just for coatings, but coatings and other chemical businesses. And believe me, Adam, that was quite a challenge in the sense that there was a lot of resistance. What now sounds weird to say, how can you resist, e-commerce? Back then, not everybody was convinced to move into this direction, especially in the B2B business, which was my case. Yeah?
Yeah. No, it's so interesting because you can see a lot of parallels between what you're talking about, where today e-commerce is like everybody does e-commerce. You would never think about doing a business without e-commerce. I mean, obviously, okay, take that back. If you're an auto body shop, like you can't do e-commerce, but service-based business. But if you're selling products, like it would be ridiculous to think about not doing e-commerce, right?
Yeah, no way.
But back then, there was a whole lot of resistance to that idea, saying things like, oh, well, the customer's never going to buy something that they can't touch and feel. If they can't experience it, they're not going to purchase it. Yeah. And that's something that people should keep in mind whenever you start to hear resistance about new things now, about how, we'll never do that because of X, Y, and Z reason. Yeah. Well, people have said that about every single technological update ever. So
and discussions were ridiculous by today's standards. Like, no customer will place an order online. That's not their job. They would never accept an electronic invoice. And look where we are today, huh? Crazy, huh? But those were real objections back then.
So how did you get yourself into that mindset change of going from a financial guy, a numbers guy, to marketing, what did you read anything, or did you get into the field? Like, what'd you do?
Yeah, I think it was a combination of, being excited about the change. I was still young, so there was a lot of reading, getting up to date in this, saying, okay, that's the part of the theory I have not learned at university. So let's pick up a couple of books, the typical Porter and marketing gurus back then. Did a couple of seminars, which I was supported, of course, by the company to attend seminars. And then it was really learning the business from the technical point of view, from the sales point of view, as you say, discuss a lot with our distribution, so our distributors. It was indirect business back then via distributors and agents, and really get to know the end users, so the body shops, which made all the difference. So it was a combination, I would say.
Gotcha. And where are you located at now when you're doing the marketing for BASF? This is still in South America, correct?
Yeah, so my first marketing job was in Buenos Aires, doing the business for Argentina.
Gotcha. And then you moved to Spain at some point.
Yes. So after six years approximately doing this marketing role, there was a chance so I was invited by the company to move to Madrid back then. And this is when I jumped to the OEM business. So idea back then was to move to Spain, learn about the OEM business, with the initial idea to go back to Brazil to manage this business, which then turned out a completely different way. I stayed much longer in Spain. And again, I always say the business change. So when you talk about people outside of the coatings industry, you get coatings. But when you get to know the coatings industry from inside, there are a lot of different businesses like OEM, nothing to do with refinish. Industrial coatings is again quite diverse. Deco coatings, printing inks, and so on. And the change from refinish into OEM was quite a stretch, I would say. It's really demanding business. Supply chain, logistics, on-time deliveries. Technically, again, it's a next step. You discuss the same properties, but with customers which are really on the high end of demand. Yeah.
So that was a bit of a shock to you and a bit of a learning curve for you to learn that then, huh?
It was really to recalibrate and say, okay, I thought I knew the coatings business well. I knew the deco and the refinish. Now I need to learn this new business. This was a sales role, so very much in the field and customer-facing role, but hugely interesting for me.
How old were you at this point?
Probably 28 or something like this.
So you're at an age where like you're still pretty malleable, like moldable. You can still you can react to these kinds of big stressors or changes and stuff like that. Do you think that made you a better overall salesperson, marketing person, or better person for the company overall because you understood all of the intricacies of the deco and everything like that, that business, plus you could take some of that knowledge, whatever it might have been, some of that skill set over to the refinish and part of the industry?
Oh yeah. I think the OEM really the OEM business teaches you a lot about the technical stuff. But I would say above the technical stuff, which is really demanding, I would say you get to really learn the key account management side of things. So you're dealing with huge accounts like the Daimlers, Fords, GMs, Toyotas, and all these guys. And you really need a key account approach because you are not, let's say, whatever your responsibility is, you're part of a global organization because the customers in turn are global and you're usually interacting, let's say, with all your colleagues globally to really put forward action plans, service plans, take part in global bids and so on, and then you understand what really key account is all about.
Would you mind just kind of explaining what a key account, the idea behind that, for anybody who doesn't understand what that is?
So you would define a key account as a very large customer, which is complex by nature. So it's not a mom and pop shop. So it's not a family-owned business normally. It's really a conglomerate of companies, and you have different contact persons with different roles. So you need a much more, let's say, sophisticated, complex sales approach in saying, if we go back to the OEM business, okay, it's a company producing cars, and those cars will be assembled, painted, and then shipped to the distribution network. But then you say, okay, it's not just if I'm a sales guy being responsible for this specific key account. I don't have just one contact person in let's say the purchase department. There's a global purchase department, maybe local purchase. Then there's engineering, because there are projects and sometimes you bid on projects, on specific sites, on layers of coatings for one site. You can bid on a specific layer across production sites, for instance, for the complete European primer business, just to give you an example. And then you have quality, environmental considerations, supply chain management. So you really have a huge diversity of contact persons, and you have to set up your team to really match the customer expectations. Mm-hmm. So this kind of bow tie, one contact person for everything, usually is by far not the best approach.
Hey guys, Adam from the podcast. I hope you are enjoying today's episode. Just wanted to ask you a quick favor. If the show has brought you value in some way, would you mind giving us a review and sharing the show? It really helps the show get out there. Also, if you are looking to expand the services that your shop offers and you want to do more than collision work, you should really check out our company, Clarity Coat. Clarity Coat is a peelable paint that allows body shops to offer color changes cheaper than a repaint while still looking like real paint. You can also offer clear protection that has no edges and is sprayed instead of laid. Unlike vinyl and PPF, Clarity Coat can be sanded and polished, so you can give your customer the exact look that they are wanting. If you are looking to expand your shop's services, go to claritycoat.com and fill out our Become an Installer form. All right, let's get back to the show. I can't even imagine something like that, because now you've got, instead of building a relationship with one single person, now you've got to build a relationship or understand how multiple different people work inside of an industry, inside of a customer base. And man, how did you learn to navigate that?
There's a lot of coordination. So as much as in a body shop, the body shop manager has a phone which is all the time red hot and ringing, and you know how it works. Here I would say it's the same. Lots of coordination, being alert to what's going on everywhere, and really pulling all strings so that you have action plans in place, and everybody really playing their role to build a consistent, let's say, service approach to the customer.
Gotcha. I should have probably asked this before, but how was that move from Brazil to Spain? Like, as far as like culturally, language, anything like that for you?
Yeah, much easier than the business change, because in Argentina, we were set up by a lot of immigration, and something like 60-70% of the original immigration in Argentina was either Spanish or Italian.
Oh,
so
really?
Culture-wise, it's quite familiar for us. Language is, of course, not an issue. It's the same, just with a different accent. That, Spanish is very rich accent-wise. When you go, from Mexico downwards, you can find like 15 different accents at least for all countries like Venezuela, Colombia, Argentina, Chile, and they all sound different, but we all communicate with Spanish. So really easy, and I'm back after a long loop back in Spain that I enjoy very much the country, and I cannot recommend even for holidays or spending some time. Is a lovely place and really good quality of living. So yeah, it was an easy move.
Well, I can tell you that me and the wife, we are actually planning or hoping to do at least one vacation to Spain in the not too distant future because of my business partner. I told you about that already. So we've already got a house and everything there. So
Great. And
not
definitely,
like for anybody who's listening, we don't own a house in Spain. We just have access to a house in Spain.
definitely worth it. Great place to spend some time in holidays. Yes.
So you're in Spain, and then you end up making a transition over to Germany, which is culturally and everything just a total. I don't know. Would you say it's like a total 180, or would you say that it's just like 90 degrees off from?
Well, nowadays you could say it's not that much of a change as it used to be 15, 20, 25 years ago, because we talk about the European Union, and we have a common currency, the euro, and the border, let's say, even if every country in Europe is quite itself, the French feel very French, the Italian, and everybody says we are extremely different from our neighbors, you would say it's not a massive, let's say. You have to be very, I would say, intercultural savvy. So intercultural awareness, how to do business, how to communicate, how to relate to people in other countries in Europe. I think it's massive. It's really important. And then it's just the language. I didn't speak German, or I didn't learn German as a kid when I was in school, so that took some effort afterwards. And it's not an easy language by any means. So that was part of the challenge. But as I was telling you before, I think things work really well, socially, culturally. Education is perfect, so for my kid and so on. So it was a really interesting move. And it was moving from local roles, either Spain, Portugal. When I was in Spain, for instance, I had responsibility over Spain, Portugal, and some businesses in Turkey. When I was in South America, was Argentina, and so on. And when I moved into Germany, was an European role.
Yeah, the understanding different cultures and how they respond to certain things, or how they respond to work versus family and all those kinds of things, I'll be honest with you, is really difficult for me to understand as an American, because so what's interesting is so my business partner Justin, he's from the UK, right?
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that has probably been the trickiest thing for him to understand is just how big America is.
Oh, yeah.
And the easiest way I could figure out how to relate it to him is I said, you take all of Europe, which still isn't as big as America, and every country that is in Europe is basically a state. Like, it's just an individual state in America. So I was like, so you talking about us just driving over to Chicago from Sioux Falls, South Dakota, is like you saying, I'm going to just drive from London over to Germany. Like, it's hours drive, right? So that kind of helped him out a little bit. But one thing that I've really noticed culturally, the differences, is you are going to have cultural differences in America, right? Mm-hmm. But it's more of like large sections of America where you have cultural differences. So the Midwest is just kind of like the Midwest. Like we do things and we have certain tendencies and everything like that. But then you have like Southeast America, which is just like totally different. You have Northeast America, which is just totally different. But anyways, the reason why I'm bringing this up is because when I went over to the UK in July, we visited one of our distributors down in France. And my business partner was kind of coaching me. He's like, hey, just so you understand, like, they understand English, but you kind of got to go like slower, and they don't want to be
yeah.
pressured into anything. Like it's about building relationships with them and everything like that, right?
Yeah.
Whereas when we deal with some of our German distributors, he's like, you got to have your ducks in a row. They're very process oriented.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
it's
Oh,
it's
yeah.
they just move down the line, right?
Oh, yeah.
And
If
sorry, go ahead.
if you would, let's say, try to simplify something which is very complex,
Yeah.
socially, cultural, you could say south of Europe is very much relationship based. So you need to trust the other party, and then you start to discuss business, and it builds up from there. If you take the upper half, and you could say Germany, Benelux, Nordics, all the upper part. As you say, you have to be fact-based. They want to know everything about your product, your service capabilities, who you are, and so on. And maybe in a second stage, they want to know Adam and his partner as persons, yeah? Which is, there's nothing wrong. It's just a different approach, yeah?
Yep. And it's so funny because I care about people, right? Like
Yeah.
obviously like I have the podcast and I love learning about people. But like when it comes to business, I'm very like, okay, what's the bullet points? All right,
Yes.
I think we want to move forward with this, and then it's about relationships second type of thing.
I think it's just a matter of adjusting your communication style, what you put more emphasis on. It's not neglecting either the technical, the bullet points, the structure, in favor of, let's say, the soft side of things. I think it's just where you put your focus on and your emphasis. Yeah.
So I don't know if this is too pointed of a question, but
Yeah.
is there a particular culture that you have found that is the most difficult for you to align with or work with, just because of just the expectation differences between the two different cultures?
If you're asking my own personal journey,
Yeah. Yep.
I did struggle a bit, for instance, in Turkey, but I cannot say whether it's just the cultural side of things, which I found really interesting, and it was a culture I didn't know anything about, and I got to learn a lot in my very often travels there and so. But I would have to be honest in saying it was a strange setup in which ourselves, we were still set up as a joint venture, customer was still set up as a joint venture, so a very complex, let's say, business environment.
Gotcha.
And the business itself was complex, language, not everybody spoke English, so you always needed some kind of translation, which doesn't make it easier, and it's a language that you cannot get any single word, it's totally different. Once
Yeah.
you are there 2 years, you start to hear like the good morning, thank you, please, goodbye, and so on, but everything else is really something that sounds, totally different.
Now, again, ignorant American question. In the European Union, is English getting taught at a younger and younger age now, to where
Yes.
like that way it's much
Oh, yeah.
easier. So you have English as a secondary language across most countries in the EU, and then obviously they have their dominant language, which is
Yeah.
Spanish or Turkish or whatever it might be.
Yeah, absolutely like this. So you would say young people in whichever country now have a quite good level of English. In former times, maybe the second language was split into French or English. Now I would say it's massively English, and it would be hard to find young people in any given country without a decent, let's say, level of English nowadays. And you do have a few countries, which is amazing, and it's part of this learning why every country is different, like Netherlands or Belgium, where they speak, I would say, I cannot say, quote, which percentage of the population, but I've met a lot of people speaking 4, 5 languages.
Yep.
which for me it was like, wow, I speak a couple of languages, but it blew me away. It was like
Yep.
5.
Yeah.
I even met guys with 6 languages and I say, wow,
Well,
impressive.
yeah, we have distributors in Belgium,
Yeah.
and Belgium is just kind of like its own weird
Oh, yeah.
situation all in its own, right? But from the get-go, you have to get used to pretty much 3 or 4 different languages.
Indeed.
Right, just in
Indeed.
Belgium alone.
Oh, yeah.
And then you have to learn English on top of all of that. So what was really interesting is we actually met them in France. They drove down to France to meet us there, and they were like, my other languages are fine, but like English a little bit shaky. But I like, to me, like, I thought they did just fine. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like, they might not pick up on the nuances of English.
Oh, yeah.
Where
Oh, yeah.
only people that have been speaking the language their entire life are ever going to pick up on. But I don't know. I think it's so fascinating. What's one of the most common questions I get with Clarity Code is like, how do you work with people all over the world? And I tell them, I'm like, actually, as long as you don't expect people to pick up the small nuances in language, like, when we say, I don't know, I don't even know a good example. Like,
I don't know, but there are many.
yeah, there's you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
but,
yeah, sure.
I say, actually, everyone speaks English like
Oh, yeah.
good enough to be able to build a relationship and do business. Like, it works out just fine.
I think every time you get to learn a new language, I think a good approach or a good advice would be communication over perfection. Like, make sure you're able to understand, express yourself, and get to a point where you overread this kind of misunderstandings.
Yeah.
When you unintentionally say something and you really screw up, or you convey a different message, and business-wise that could be tricky. I think if you're over this point, minor pronunciation mistakes or missing one or the other word is not so bad, right?
Yeah. And I think to that point, I think what a lot of people need to understand is that people know when you don't speak their language natively, and they're okay with they can piece together what you're trying to say. So obviously our podcast is mostly in America, right? Mm-hmm. Well, if someone comes over from Asia, any Asian country, they don't speak English very well, right? It's a huge difference from Asian language to English. But like, we all know that one Asian person that we've tried talking to, and it's very broken English, but you understand what they're trying to get at. Now, as if you're an American in a whole different country, it's the exact same setup. You're like, if I tried to speak Spanish to you, which I could not do because I only know like 3 words, you would be like, oh, okay, I understand what you're trying to get at,
No, but it's fair what you say, that if you really go the extra mile and you try to speak a few words of the other language, and so is appreciated. And if you go to business, let's choose a common language in which we can work things out,
Yeah. Okay, so sorry for anybody. We've spent quite a bit of time on that, but to me, that's absolutely fascinating.
Oh, yeah.
So you're working at BASF. You got thrust into this new world and everything like that. How long were you in that role before you kind of moved on to something else?
Yeah. So interesting. It was something like only 2 to 3 years in that role. So that was a transportation business, Europe-wide. And at that point in time, BASF decides to divest the complete industrial coatings business and sell it to Akzo Nobel. Yeah? My business, transportation, was actually not part of the industrial coatings business. It was like a satellite of refinish coatings. So this was coating systems for trucks, buses, trailers, trains, and ACE equipment, so agricultural and construction equipment. And long story short, soon before the closing of this deal, which was a huge deal, very much motivated by businesses like coil coatings, foil coatings, and general industry and so on. My business was kind of partially tailor-made systems. So we borrowed some materials from refinish, but we also, let's say in between brackets, borrowed some material from industrial coatings, OEM coatings to serve, let's say, these major transportation customers, which needed everything from e-coat, liquid coatings, a bit of powder, and everything, I would say. So very diverse. And the decision was, let's keep at BASF the truck and bus business, which is much more like the refinish, the OEM, so the core BASF coatings businesses. And the other part, it was like sectioned, so 50-50. And the other part, which was much more tailor-made, was put together with industrial coatings and divested and sold to Akzo Nobel. So that's when I was invited to move to Akzo Nobel. And this was the second part of my staying in Germany. Already after the closing of this deal, I worked the next 2 to 3 years integrating the acquired business into Akzo Nobel. That was, massive work. So not just changing customers, but the complete portfolio had to migrate from, in stage one, still being produced at BASF coating sites, to being moved and relocated and transferred to Akzo Nobel sites.
Wow.
So that was a major challenge.
That sounds like an immense amount of work.
Oh, yeah. And again, a next learning opportunity in saying every time it gets challenging and the road gets tough, you do get to learn a lot. So really thankful for this learning opportunity.
How big is Akzo Nobel at that point? Like, I mean, obviously I would say it's probably nowhere near BASF, right?
In the coatings, so actually I would say it's not that much comparable, because Akzo Nobel at that point in time had a chemical division and had coatings, and then divested the chemicals and really kept the core business in coatings. And for BASF, coatings is just one division, and the much larger part by far is all the other chemicals. Agrochemicals, petrochemicals, resins, pigments, all the other divisions. So it's hard to compare one to one. You know,
Gotcha.
Akzo is one of the big players in coatings, you know, with all the other usual global companies. And it was just changing. And again, if we touch the cultural point, again, very interesting to say I worked over 20 years for a German company and then joined a Dutch company, which again, you could say they are neighbors, because geographically you can drive, you know, in 2 hours and get from Germany into the Dutch border. But again, culturally, it's a bit different.
Yeah. So what was that transition like for you working for BASF and Akzo Nobel? Like, what was some of the big learning curves that you had to go through for each company?
So again, I did some, as usually, when every time I changed jobs, picked up my books, my studies, and tried to catch up and try to anticipate myself onto what I was getting into. But you learn a lot just by doing. And again, I think it was very interesting. Into every business transition is quite challenging and bumpy, you could say, to be honest, because again, customers are usually not asked, do you want to change suppliers? A whole part of the team is also not asked, do you want to change companies? You know the story. So there's a lot of change management involved. Again, another key word that we hear a lot and sounds like a buzzword, but I think when you are involved from the inside into these processes, I think it's huge. Change management, what it implies, and discussing very intensively with all parties what's going on, where we are heading on, what are the challenges ahead, discussing the pain points, the advantages, because of course there are advantages in every change, and fully looking into what could be better in the future.
So you go from Akzo Nobel to what was the next step for you?
So I integrated this business, and like I said, something like two and a half years. So lots of work, and the integration was quite successful, even though it was bumpy and not always very pleasant. And that's when I decided to take a side road, relocate back to Spain, and join my current company, which is called ROBERLO. It's the largest Spanish coatings producer. It's part of a group called BRIOLF, comprised of 7 companies, something like 220 to 250 million euros turnover. And very much focused in refinish, but also in spray coatings, a bit of OEM, a bit of chemical anchoring business. So all across the coatings industry.
Interesting. So, I mean, you up at this point, you'd spent most of your life working for large companies, corporations, and everything like that. And would it be fair to say that the new role at ROBERLO is a smaller company? What was that transition for you like?
Yes, indeed. So since the very beginning, when I worked for Pricewaterhouse, KPMG in the auditing world, then joined BASF, all these were massive global companies. ROBERLO is a smaller company by these standards, but it has, I think, a wonderful point. At least for me, was very attractive, and this was way more important than relocating back to Spain and buying ourselves a home and so on, it's in growth mode. So ROBERLO and the BRIOLF group is growing a lot, and I think it's very, let's say, rewarding when you're working for a company, an organization that's really pushing forward to grow, to develop, to acquire new business, this combination of organic growth, acquisitions. This year, the group bought 2 additional companies in Italy, by the way, the 2 of them. And I think it makes a huge difference because, as you know, in refinish, not everything is rosy and very nice. So the long-term picture has some clouds in the sky, because of this trend towards less accidents, which will hit hard, I think, our more developed regions, like North America, like Europe, I think will be hit first when the Teslas and similar vehicles really work as they are supposed to. I think we will see it. Of course, we always get the compensation of other regions in South and Central America and Asia pushing very hard, which will somehow counterbalance, right? I think the relative weight of the regions, if we take a long-term approach, will continue to change. Asia will be gaining and gaining and gaining, relevance, and probably our more developed and the biggest chunks of the coatings industry by today, North America and Europe, will decrease in proportion, right?
Yeah.
And we as, let's say, professionals and companies, we just need to acknowledge this and learn and really to change our approach. Probably again, in this intercultural awareness, become more global. Yeah.
Yeah. Is there anything that you guys are concentrating on as a company to, so you can see these storm clouds ahead, you can see the roadblocks, resistances, and everything like that. Is there anything that you guys are concentrating on to help with that, to overcome any of that?
Yeah, I think one of the oldest tricks in the book is diversification, and this could be product portfolio, businesses, but also geographical, and that's something that we are doing quite well in being very aggressive in covering the globe and being very much exports focused. So not depending so much on the local market and the neighboring markets, but really being aggressive in understanding these geographical, let's say, trends, what's going on in Southeast Asia, in the Americas, and every time I would say the organization, and not just talking about my own, I think we need to feel less of our own, like if we are from the Midwest, from Spain, from Germany, whatever, and really approach a global business. And that helps a lot to minimize what's going on specifically, like right now in Europe, because of Ukraine, Russia, and so on. We have a huge energetic crisis, cost of, you must have heard electricity and gases has skyrocketed 5 times or fivefold, tenfold, and that's really impacting our business as well.
Yeah.
Body shops are really under a lot of stress on costs lately.
I really hate to say this, but I think that over the next couple of years, I don't think we're anywhere near being done. I think I'm just going to call it the Great Reset. You're just going to see a lot of things just reset. Like, there's a lot of things that are going to get dialed way back to basics and executing on those basics really, really well.
I have to be honest, and I was the first, let's say, to be wrong. If you would have asked me what's with this COVID and so on, I said, it's not going to be so bad, it's the press, everybody is exaggerating. I would have never imagined how long, how deep, massive lockdowns. For me, that was kind of, it cannot be,
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's okay to be wrong every once in a while.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Again, we learn, it's just like learning and growing, and then what happened with the raw materials and the stuff not being able to come from Asia or from whatever, the story with the chips and the automotive production saying, wow, that's weird,
Yeah.
Cars have chips since ages, so what's going on?
It really, more than anything, the last couple of years have really highlighted how much of a house of cards a lot of the global systems were dependent on. I mean, it's not the Suez Canal, but what was the strait that got shut down for a month or so?
Yes, with the ship being crossed over in the middle, right?
Yeah. I apologies, I don't remember what the strait was called, but I mean, who would have thought that all it took to cripple the entire global infrastructure was one ship just parked.
But it's hard to believe, huh?
Yeah. I mean, and you just think like, and then you start to realize like those straits or those canals or whatever, there's only like, what is it, like 3 or 4 of them globally in the entire world. Yeah. And you block one and it just brings everything to its knees, because everything out there for the last decade or so has been built on just-in-time manufacturing and just-in-time shipping and production and everything. So if that one ship is delayed by more than a week, it's a huge ripple effect.
But you could also say, it comes back to basics in the sense that then we went all the way back to very basics of business management, like saying, okay, dual sourcing in our procurement processes. It's not all cost, it's also securing supplies. And this is by no means new, We just forgot about it and said, oh no, now it's a global marketplace, we can source much cheaper. But what about securing our supplies?
Yeah.
And this past couple of years, again, made a massive difference, If you had enough stock, and in the coatings industry it was an issue, do you have all your portfolio complete, or are you suffering from lack of raw materials?
Yeah. just real quick, just out of curiosity, how are you guys? So you said that you're finding companies, acquiring them, bringing them into the portfolio and everything like that. What is it that you guys are kind of looking for as far as like what makes a company attractive as far as like acquiring them, bringing in the portfolio, and then what does that whole process look like for you guys?
I think is trying to
a very
find,
complex question.
Yeah, I know.
understand.
I would say, long story short, and with the risk of oversimplifying, is how complementary and how much of potential synergies can you find. It's not just, let's say, a simple equation that you say, I buy a company with this much resources, this many employees, and this many production sites and customers and turnover. There's much more into the analysis and the equation.
Gotcha.
To just say, does it make sense or not?
Yeah. I'm sorry for that. I guess I probably should have thought about that a little bit, because that's just such a complex thing. But you're not out there trying to buy a chip manufacturer, because it doesn't make any sense for your guys' company. But you might look at there was I'm gonna get flamed for this, but we had a podcast episode probably 10 episodes ago or so of a guy who has a produces color, helps produce color. He's a color, he helps make colors.
So designer.
Yeah. Yep. Designer. I might have to try and find that episode now, but it was super interesting, because like something like that might be something that you guys would look at and say, okay, do we need to build up the color portion of our business? Paul Geardhart, let's see, he works for Color Invent BV. So, and actually, weirdly enough, he worked for Akzo Nobel before that as well.
Okay, coatings is a small world, huh?
Yeah. So, you might look at that company and say, hey, our color division or whatever, we might want to look at making this a little bit stronger, because it's currently where we're weak. And this company over here has been doing really well. They've got some decent resources. Let's bring them into the fold and see if that makes sense for us. Is that kind of like the generality behind it?
Yeah, but if I tie this with what we were talking just a few minutes ago on integration, I think it's one part is really choosing your acquisition targets very well. But as important as this is what you do afterwards in the integration process. So it's kind of what comes in the acquired company. There's a lot of know-how, added value, and so on that you have to capitalize, and not just, let's say, put this into your existing business, neglect what comes as new, saying, that's not the way we do things right here. And of course, not to lose any valuable assets, human resources, and customers along the way. Because in there's, I think, many examples of unsuccessful integrations. Not just in the coatings industry, which is a pity, because we should also learn from the not so successful experiences of others, right?
Yeah. It is shocking, the failure rate of even as something as a new owner stepping into an existing business, right?
Sure.
The amount, the percentage of success is way lower than what most people think it is.
Oh yeah.
And actually, I've personally witnessed this firsthand. When I sold my company, did not go so well for the other guy, as far as like. Anyways, don't want to get into that too much. But
it's a fair comment, and I think the preparation and the transition and the carryover, especially of the previous management, supporting the let's say the first steps, baby steps of the newly formed or integrated company, are very important.
And going back to hard skills versus soft skills, I would say that if you are a change manager, you're going to be so far on the soft skill side where you just have to feel people out and you have to kind of guide them along to this new transition and everything like that. Because if you try to present them with facts, data, and everything like that, people don't care about that. Like, I mean, there's very few people in the company that would care about that.
Oh yeah, I'm by no means an expert in integrations, acquisitions, and this kind of work, which is very complex. But I've heard something of within the acquiring company and the team that's working on the acquisition and the integration to have somebody solely responsible of the customer experience, saying he should be the voice of the customer and really have some power in saying, no, this is not the way we should do this. Beware, be careful, let's rethink this or that. And it makes all sense, huh?
Yeah. Well, Juan, it has been a absolutely wonderful chat. Is there anything that you want to kind of close it out with? Do you want to tell people?
Really nice chat, and many thanks for the invitation, Adam.
Well,
it was great, really fun.
Where can people find you if they want to get a hold of you?
Mostly LinkedIn. I'm quite an old-fashioned guy, so I'm not very active in social media. So my company is, but me personally not that much. But LinkedIn is where I move, and you can find me.
Awesome. All right, guys, go check them out on LinkedIn. And Juan, again, thank you so much for coming on today's show. It was such a pleasure talking to you and learning about your life and just the various different parts of what you've done and how that fits into the industry as a whole.
Many thanks to you, Adam. A pleasure.
This is the Auto Body Podcast, presented by Clarity Code.